Good evening and welcome to the January 25th meeting of the Penfield Board of Education. This meeting is called to order at 6:38 p.m. Please follow the clerk while she leads us in the pledge. Sharon, you're on mute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May I have the approval of the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from January 11th, 2022 as submitted, the acceptance of the recommendation from the Committee on Special Education, the acceptance of recommendations from the Committee on Preschool Special Education, the acceptance of recommendations from the Superintendent for personnel changes, request to approve the bidders that you have listed below. So may I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education approves consent agenda?
So moved.
Barb?
Second.
Catherine, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. It is recommended that the treasurer's report, including the cash report, the general fund cash report, the general fund revenue status report, general fund budget status report, school lunch fund cash report, and the school lunch fund revenue and expense budget report for the month ending November 30th, 2021 be approved. So may I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Kristen?
Second.
Emily, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Which brings us to special reports. I think we have a couple of special reports today. So Dr. Putnam, can you lead us in that?
Absolutely. We have two special reports this evening. First up is we're going to hear from Matthew Batone, First Assistant Chief of the Penfield Fire Company, and Dennis Jeffries, President of the Brighton Fire Department. They're here to share with the board and the community a bit around the volunteer firefighter and ambulance real property tax exemption. I'll turn it over. I have slides that I'll work through. And as Matthew knows, that just let me know when to change the slide, as the power of Zoom is you're not sharing the screen. And then we'll go to, after that, we'll go to our textbook presentation. Sheena Conway, Director of Humanities, Amy Powers, one of our incredible English teachers at Bay Trail, and Erica Stutz, our Bay Trail House Seat Principal, are going to present some textbooks up that the board will be looking at approving. And I'll turn it over to Matthew and Dennis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Putnam. We appreciate your time. So the reason that we asked for this was, if you are not aware, sir, if you can hit the next slide for me, please. Back on December 1st of 2021, Governor Hochul signed legislation into law that gives volunteer firefighters and volunteer ambulance members the ability to have a 10% reduction on our taxable liabilities, on our personal property taxes for those of us that meet certain requirements. That was sponsored by Senator Brauch and Assembly Member Lunsford, and again, signed into law. We have a lot of support, not only from across the state, but also from across our county, both sides of the aisle in this. So I personally have been a volunteer firefighter. I just started in my 25th year. I started at the age of 14. In the Penfield Fire Company, one of the things that we realize as we go out and interact with the community is a lot of people don't realize that we are 100% volunteer, which means we do not get paid for this. So we have seen our numbers steadily decline over the last 30 years, if not longer. And that's what we want to talk about, is the impact that this legislation would have on our members and the ability to recruit and retain new members. So we are currently here in Monroe County. This is the 11th county to have this legislation enacted. So this is not new. Again, out of the, I believe we have 62 counties in all of New York State, we are the 11th. So again, this law was signed into, this legislation was signed into law on December 1st of 2021 by Governor Hochul. So far, we've had great responses from the County of Monroe, Town of Penfield, and the Penfield Fire District, and also the Town of Harrington in support of this legislation. Next slide, sir. And as you can see here on the screen that Governor Hochul obviously believes in this with some of what it is that she had to add in her personal remarks. When trouble calls, our volunteer firefighters and emergency workers are there to answer. They selflessly volunteer, these selfless volunteers deserve our full support, and I'm proud to sign legislation that rewards them for their sacrifice and encourages others to join their ranks to keep our communities in Monroe County safe. Next slide, sir. So a little bit about our organization. Again, as I previously stated, we are 100% volunteer. Again, none of us get any money for the job that we do. Here in Monroe County, we are 5% of all volunteer departments nationwide that protect a population greater than 25,000 people. We currently have 59 volunteer firefighters. The average years of service for those volunteer firefighters is 25. And here's one of the things that really shocked me while putting this presentation together is that 72% of our members are over the age of 50. So think about a volunteer firefighter. If you have an emergency at your house, that 72% of the people that are going to show up statistically to put on all of the turnout gear, a 40-pound air pack, and grab a hose and run into a house are over the age of 50. So what we're really trying to do with this legislation is bring in newer, younger members and retain the ones that we currently have. We currently respond to 900 calls for we responded to 900 calls for service in 2021. That can be anything from structure fires to vehicle accidents and car fires, medical emergencies, water and ice rescue, hazardous conditions, and service calls. We're professionals that put in hundreds of hours of training and community service each year. Each one of these calls, each one of these photos that you see is a call that happened here in our town, in our fire district in 2021. The top left was on Rossbrook. The bottom left was a house fire that we had over on Edenderry. And then the bottom right, if you remember, we lost 5 townhomes in an early morning fire over just south of Target. So again, these are all photos of our volunteers at these major incidents. Next slide, please, sir. So back in the 70s, we were up to nearly 80 members. Our charter allows for 100 members. And I was talking with one of our senior members, Tom Jones and Ron Welkley. If any of you remember, Ron Welkley is a retired Penfield school teacher. He said when he joined back in the early 60s, there was actually a waiting list. So that meant we had 100 members with a waiting list. We currently are down to 59. And as you can see, we put together this presentation to show from 2010 to 2021, we've gone from 66 up to 71, and we're now down to 59. And the thing with this is each one of us has a full-time job. We have families. I personally, my wife also owns a business here in town. So between full-time job, helping my wife run a business, I do have a kindergartner over at Scribner Road with a 3-year-old that will also be following her brother that's going to go over to Scribner Road. We do all of this while answering 900 calls a year. And again, I can't stress enough for nothing, for just the pride and the satisfaction of doing this. Next slide, please, sir. So the reason that this is so important to us is recruitment and retention. Is you can see with the numbers that we have here on the right, it shows in blue the number of recruits that we've gotten in, but it also shows the number of firefighters that we've lost. So while you say, wow, you guys have gotten over the last 10 years, you've gotten 41 new members in, that's great, but we've lost 62. So obviously that is a huge loss to us. And it's not a loss to us, not only a loss to us, it's a loss to our community. That is less volunteer firefighters to show up at our neighbors in their time of need. And so we have had multiple meetings in the last year about what can we do. We've rebuilt a website. We're really targeting social media. We've had open houses. We've done community events. The county and state governments have been helping us with different campaigns also. But we're facing challenges. Some of those challenges I won't go into because they're more of a state level issue. But some of the challenges we've had here is most families now, in order to afford housing in our district, have to be 2-income households. The challenge of raising children while working, while having both parents working, the cost of taxes, the cost of purchasing a house, and there's no benefit. We have a lack of incentives. And it's a huge time commitment just to get a firefighter in the door as a recruit. The first thing that they have to do is take a 160-hour training class. So it's 2 nights a week for 6 months. And that's where we lose a lot of people. But then also once we get them in, it's like, well, what's in it for me? And, we do have a retirement. We're very lucky here in our fire district that we do have a small retirement system built in. But this is just one of the many things that we're trying to use to recruit new members. I'm going to actually turn it over to Dennis Jeffries for a minute to speak about the Brighton fire, because what we want you to realize is this school district covers not only the Penfield Fire District, but also the Brighton Fire District.
Good evening, Dennis Jeffries here, President of the Brighton Fire Department, and thank you to Chief Patone for including us. Our north end of the district covers pretty much the west end of the Penfield School District, including Indian Landing Elementary. I want to go through and kind of highlight where Brighton's at, and kind of a similar situation with Penfield. We currently have 84 volunteers, which we are fortunate 3 years ago, we applied for a federal grant for recruitment and retention purposes. So we're 3 years into it. It's coming to an end. In that 3 years, we were able to recruit 36 members, which is phenomenal. The big issue with that is only 9 of them were homeowners within the Brighton Fire District. So they either live just outside of Brighton or were renting within the district. I'm happy to say we retained all 9 of those homeowners through that 3 years, and they've become very productive and great members. But we lost 11 members who are non-homeowners. So what we're finding is we really need to figure out how we can target district homeowners as they've developed roots in the community. And like Chief Patone said, it's just the training requirements are very stringent, especially in the beginning. So for us, is being able to use a tool like this for recruitment and retention is an absolute game changer. And we're in the same lines with Penfield, where our folks are aging, they're getting older, it's getting tougher to fight fires. But one of the things too I want to point out is why homeowners are so important to us is I'm sure most of you saw there was a pretty significant fire at the Pines of Parrington this morning. Came in at 3:30 this morning. There were 14 companies there, fire departments there, which included 2 trucks from Penfield, 2 trucks from Brighton. Early counts, I had at least 125 firefighters were there. I think it's extremely important to point out of at least 125, there were probably a lot more. 2 of those were paid firefighters and every other one was a volunteer. So it's critical for us to have people that live in the district and they're close to the station, because they're the ones that in the middle of the night at 3:30, they can get to the station quick, get on the truck. And although it was a significant fire, the stop that was made by the firemen was absolutely incredible to save it from the rest of the compound. So I just thought it was important to point out that little fact of how important the volunteers are in the southeast part of Monroe County, and that, they did all the work this morning. And then, most of them were there for at least 8 hours. There's still crews there now. So those folks either had to take a sick or vacation day today, or hopefully their boss is understanding and lets them make up the time like myself. So I'll be working late tonight to make it up. But, it's important to understand what these folks are giving up. And that that is a hard thing to recruit for. That, you leave at 3:30 in the morning, and I got home at about 1:30 this afternoon. And my wife said, "At what point are you going to help with the kids?" And I said, I got dinner. Don't worry about it. So, I think that's just an important thing to point out, and give you a kind of stance of where Brighton's at as well.
So as I'm sure all of you are aware, we try to take a very active role within our community. The top left picture you'll see, that is a picture we took out in front of our fire station for the 2021 graduation parade that started over on Baird Road, came down 441 and went back up 5 Mile. We also help with all fire and safety prevention. Within the school district, we help with your DWI reenactments. We do school visits, station tours. Within the community, we do all sorts of senior parades, fire prevention education. We not only go into Penfield Central School District buildings, but we also do a lot of nursery schools, preschools, daycares, stuff like that. We assist with the homecoming bonfires, and 2021 was a great year for our fall sports, as I'm sure you're all aware. Every single time that our phone rang for a sports escort, we answered. And again, that was all from our volunteer firefighters leaving home. We currently have 10 members in our Youth Explorer post also. And some of those are from your school district. Next slide, please, sir. So what are the benefits to our membership and also who it is that we're trying to recruit? This legislation is another tool in our toolbox to help bring in new members. So again, this is not just for our current members. If anybody is watching this at home, or anybody that you talk to that might have an interest, after 2 years, this would also apply to them if they are a homeowner. This helps us retain our existing members that we need so much in our community, as Dennis was saying. And this will also help us continue to serve our community for years to come. I believe we're in approximately our 180th year of serving the Penfield Fire District. And also we're hoping that this will also, even though it'll be a small increase to the average homeowner, it will be a huge cost savings. Next slide, please, sir. So now to get into some of the numbers. With a 10% reduction in taxes, it would reduce the tax burden for Penfield Fire Company and Brighton Fire Department personnel by a little over $23,000, and that's just in school taxes. This figure is not inclusive of the 17 Penfield ambulance personnel that would also qualify. We're still working on pulling some of those numbers together. With that $23,000 being redistributed amongst households in the school district, it would add an average of $1.64 per household per year, or that breaks down to an additional 13 cents per month. Now, we bring that up to say, if our numbers keep trending down, one of the things that the Penfield Fire District Board of Commissioners is responsible for is providing fire protection. And if we don't have volunteers, then the only alternative is that they are going to have to pay for those, or pay for career firefighters. One paid firefighter costs approximately $150,000 a year between salary, retirement, and benefits. That additional cost would add between $600 to $800 more per year in fire district tax. That is something that each one of us, every single one of us, I believe, that are sitting on this meeting right now, would have to pay an additional $600 to $800. So to me, as also a taxpayer and a homeowner in this school district, is would we rather pay an additional $1.64 or an additional $600 to $800? I'm not the world's greatest math person, but I would rather pay $1.64 to try to retain what we currently have. And to also try to build on that. So again, this is not just for our current members. This is for anybody that wants to join. Next slide, please, sir. So in closing, what we're asking for, we're asking for the school board to please consider adopting this legislation to help us maintain the service that we have so proudly provided to our community over the last 180 years. If we are unable to provide this volunteer service to the community, the increased tax impact of hiring first responders would far outweigh the proposed tax exemptions. So what we're asking for is we're asking for the board's support in having a public hearing at your next scheduled board meeting in order to move this legislation forward in the form of a resolution. Any questions from any of the board members?
Thank you for that presentation. Board members, any questions? Make sure I'm just looking for hands here. Okay, well, I do want to ask, and I don't know if you are able to answer this question, but my understanding is that homeowners insurance rates are sometimes tied to the metrics in terms of response time and facilities and things like that.
Yes.
Is that something you can speak to in any sense? Maybe not the insurance rates, but maybe how that all works.
So those are called ISO ratings, and we actually just went through a ISO review, which I believe has to be done every 10 years. And at our current rate of membership and the way that we have all of our assets deployed across the fire district, we've actually been able to maintain a very high standard for our ISO rating. And that ISO rating is what would in turn affect your homeowner's insurance.
So there's an additional reason where being able to maintain the membership and the quality of service has a financial impact, and in addition to the safety impact of our community.
Correct. You know, that's actually an excellent point. That was one of the things I did not think about in this entire thing is, yes, if we continue to lose membership, that's going to affect our ISO rating, which in turn is going to increase your homeowner's insurance.
There was one more thing I wanted to add. I wanted to thank you for your time on behalf of the Brighton Fire Department. I know this is coming at the school district very quick. We're very thankful of Governor Hochul, who signed the legislation and supporting the volunteer firefighters and ambulance personnel. Our big thing is it has to be completed by March 1st in order to realize the benefit of the September taxes that are due. So if we aren't able to do it by March 1st, we're looking at possibly 20 months until we could get that benefit. And we really want to strike while the iron's hot and people have seen the releases on the new legislation and go after it and say, look, it's going to be coming up in your September bill. So that's why we're under the gun on the timing aspect. So we do appreciate you getting us in here at the last minute to have a conversation, and why we were asking for a public hearing at the next meeting, because March 1st is our hard deadline on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, we're the deadline, and we're used to the state putting these laws in place without realizing what it takes to actually implement laws. So, or this may not be a law, but policy. So we're well aware of it, and we're absolutely committed to getting this taken care of with a decision made within the time frame that's required. So
thank you. We really do appreciate it. On behalf of our members, they really do appreciate it.
Yeah. So the one thing we were going to do, and I think we're going to cover this during new business, which is at the end of the meeting, unless people want to cover it now, is talk about how to do a public hearing. If to do a public hearing, it's because we do our next board meeting, and we only have one board meeting in February. That is, I believe, February 8th. So that's the day we would have to make a decision. So unless there's someone who feels strongly otherwise, I would just put this at new business.
Yeah.
Everyone good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And that way we just keep the flow of our meeting, our normal flow of the meeting going. We will discuss how to manage a public hearing and a vote as part of new business towards the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good. All right. Well, again, thank you for joining us. And again, it's just one of those things that is an incredibly crucial part of our community, and it's oftentimes very transparent when you're going through life when nothing goes wrong. But it's important to have you there when we need you. So, thank you.
And we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your service.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so Tom.
Yep. So we'll shift to our second special report, which is a textbook presentation. Just as a reminder, the Board of Education reviews and approves textbooks when they're going to be used in a curriculum, when we have to purchase more than 5. And so this presentation is the first step, and then books go on review at district office in our public library, and we take public comment, and then the next board meeting, the board would look to potentially approve. So I'll introduce now Sheena Conway, our Director of Humanities, Amy Powers, our Bay Trail English teacher, and Erica Stutz, our Bay Trail House C principal. And thank you for being here. And I will do my very best to follow the presentation and click next slide before you tell me, but do not hesitate to tell me when to click next. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam, and thank you for allowing us some time this evening to share this hopeful new unit with you all. If you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so the 8th grade ELA team has been working very hard to come up with a new unit that we're super excited about. Right now, it's tentatively titled Own Voices, and you can see from the slide here, the purpose of this unit is to encourage students to be inspired by the authentic voices of people who represent the diverse social identities that exist in our schools, communities, and world. The books offered in this unit allow students to explore the voices and perspectives of marginalized and underrepresented groups. Some authors write about their own experiences or perspective, while other authors write realistic fiction and address issues through the experiences of fictional characters. The essential questions that students will keep returning to throughout this roughly 4-week unit are: how can authors' voices influence others to embrace diversity? And how do individual experiences shape the way we see the world, others, and ourselves? Next slide, please.
So this evening, we have 6 books to present for adoption to the Board of Education. The first one is called They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, who recounts with nostalgia and growing outrage his childhood experience in American internment camps during World War II. This graphic novel illuminates themes such as injustice, courage, loyalty, and love. The next book, Code Talkers by Joseph Bruchach, was about the Navajo Code Talkers, and they were a crucial part of the U.S. effort during World War II, sending messages back and forth in an unbreakable code that used their native language. Their role in saving American lives stayed classified for more than 20 years. This is a story about the forced assimilation of Indigenous people, pride and admiration for Navajo culture, and also the bravery and the sacrifice of these Navajo Code Talkers.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. The next up is Internment by Samira Ahmed. And that story is about Layla Amin and her parents are forced into an internment camp for Muslim American citizens. Oops, there we go. With the help of newly made friends, Layla begins a journey to fight for freedom, leading a revolution against the camp. Next slide, please. At the top there is Being Jazz by Jazz Jennings. So this is a memoir by Jazz Jennings, who shares her very public transgender journey as she inspires people to accept the differences in others while they embrace their own truths. Jazz also has her own story on, gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. Is it TLC?
Yep, TLC.
TLC. Yep.
The Silence Between Us was written by Allison Gervais. And a deaf teen, Maya moves across the country and must attend a hearing school for the first time. She navigates her new surroundings, people in her life, deaf and hearing alike. They ask her to question parts of her deaf identity, but Maya stands proudly, never giving in to the idea that her deafness is a disadvantage. And finally, Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World, written by Ashley Herring-Blake. When a tornado rips through town, Ivy Aberdeen's house is destroyed, and her family is displaced. What's worse, her notebook filled with secret drawings of girls holding hands has gone missing. Ivy's drawings begin to reappear in her locker with notes from someone telling her to open up about her identity. Next slide, please.
And just as a reminder, we wanted to bring up 2 titles that have already been previously approved by the board. The first is the very powerful Warriors Don't Cry by Melba Patillo, I think, Beals, I apologize. Melba and 8 other teenagers became iconic symbols for the civil rights movement as they integrated Little Rock's Central High School in the wake of the landmark 1954 Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus Board of Education. Warriors Don't Cry illuminates the courage and bravery of a handful of Black students who used their voices to influence change during a turbulent time. And the second one there is Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. I believe this was approved last year by the board. Trevor Noah recounts the story of his childhood in South Africa during the end of apartheid and the tumultuous days of freedom that followed. Born a Crime chronicles the early life of a mischievous young boy who grows into a restless young man struggling to find himself in a world where he was never supposed to exist. Next slide, please. And we wanted to finish with a quote that we found very powerful that is a nice way for us to end here, by Allison Russell, who's a singer, songwriter, and activist. And she has said, "We who stand at the intersections of the margins have the clearest view of the page. Our vision is needed. Representation does matter. We can't afford to leave any minds behind." Thank you for your time this evening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the overview of those books. Quite a variety of titles there. Board members, any questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Go ahead, Kristen.
I would just like to applaud the team for working so hard to select books that connect with our district focus and selecting a variety of texts. I appreciate the fact that you have a graphic novel in there because I have my own child that does not love to read, and as my own students, and those kids that sometimes struggle really gravitate towards those novels. So I love that you have a variety of novels in there. Most importantly, I love that you have selected a variety of novels that really help all of our students to connect with those characters in those books and really helps them not to feel so alone. So thank you for that hard work that you did on behalf of our students.
Very welcome.
Mark, if just not as a question from the board, but from the superintendent, I just wanted to say kudos to this team for that presentation in terms of really going through not just the books, but the why and tying it back to the unit. As a district, we continue to move towards not necessarily teaching a book as our curriculum, but what is the theme, what's the unit development behind it? And then I will speak similar to Ms. Harley, is that choice matters. And so the fact that these are selections that students can choose for this unit is really powerful. We know the research behind student choice is very strong and allows students to select something that they see that they want to read, that they want to connect to. And I love that piece of it. So a great presentation, I thought, in terms of the connection back to the unit itself and why the texts were selected. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Actually, I was going to ask about how the students go about what books are read by what students, and as you explained, it's basically this is the selection they can choose. Is this unit one book for the unit, or multiple books during that time frame?
I'm happy to field that if you'd like. This will be roughly a 4-week unit. So each student will have an introduction to each one, and they'll have the opportunity to explore one novel, one of their selections throughout that 4-week process, because it will involve journaling. It will involve group discussions with others who have selected the same novel as them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will say, just from a personal perspective, I think the book a couple of years ago, The Hate You Give, was one that was presented. And that same year, my daughter was in that class and she read it. And she said it was the only, I'll just quote, it was the only book that didn't suck. So, when we think about what kids need and what they want, we're not always right. And so giving them the choice is really, again, it really puts our faith in them and our trust in them that they know what is important to them. So thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you very much. And just for the board, as a reminder in the community, these books are already ready to be on display at our public library and our district office. And there's notes, and you can, if you have any feedback, and then those get reviewed prior to the next board meeting. So again, thank you very much. And you guys are welcome to stay and just watch the board meetings the rest of the evening, or go and spend some time with your loved ones. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
For-
All right, so before we move forward, Sharon sent me a note saying that I glossed over something. I must have had whatever. I glossed over it. I read the treasurer's report, but apparently I did not go for the motion, second, and vote on approving that.
I thought we did. We did.
I did? I thought I did.
I must have missed it then. I didn't. I can look back on the tape. Sorry.
Okay. So that's fine. That's fine. I'm, there's a lot to manage at once, and especially for you. So that's quite all right. Which then brings us to our student representative report. Lila Harvey, it's good to see you. I think this is the first time I've seen you without a mask, since we're always in the meetings with masks. So it's actually good to see you in your entirety. So please present your report.
Again, to begin with district-wide updates. So our annual jazz fundraiser is coming up on February 4th and the 5th. Here at PHS, rehearsals are underway for the spring musical, which is Mamma Mia. The hockey team recently beat Aquinas 4-0. Senior speeches are ongoing with the topic of This I Believe. The robotics team donated over 2,700 pairs of socks, along with STEM kits to Happy Birthday Cha Cha Cha. The semester is ending this Friday, which for many students means beginning new classes for the second semester. And students are also in the process of choosing their courses for the following school year. At Bay Trail, Snow Sports Club had a fun night at Bristol yesterday. And at the elementary schools, starting off with Harris Hill, concerts are back at Harris Hill inside the building. And Miss Ramsey's third graders gave presentations to their classmates about their own cultures, which was a fun way to celebrate our differences. At Scribner, students had fun sledding during recess, and kindergartners are making colorful self-portraits in art class. At Cobbles, the World Languages program will begin tomorrow and will run virtually. Students had the option to pick from Spanish, French, and German, and will be taught by high school students. Lastly, at Indian Landing, Mrs. Kaiser's students received letters back from residents of the Friendly Home in Brighton. Fifth graders discussed change that needs to happen in the world after reading about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and second graders finished their personal narratives and had fun reading and leaving comments on their classmates' narratives. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lila. Board members, any questions for Lila? Right. Again, thank you for that presentation. Okay, next is the superintendent's report. Dr. Putnam, back to you.
So there are always pros and cons to virtual or in person. I found a pro. We've already reviewed the tape, and Mark, I think you got to do the treasurer's report. So we just do that and make sure we did do an instant replay. And I think that would probably be best, just to make sure we get everything approved tonight.
That's fine. We can do that. So I'm pretty sure I read through all of it. So may I have a motion and a second that the treasurer report be approved as presented?
So moved.
Catherine? And Barb. Catherine moved, Barb seconded. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Sharon, for keeping us up to date.
And just like they do on real instant replays, if I was mistaken, at least we did it again. But as a quick review, that's what we believe. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ms. Harvey. Again, great presentation of all the things happening here around our district. So this evening, we do have some superintendent reports. I do have some student staff honors. I do have some overview updates, and I will turn during that to Dr. Maloney, who's going to share a bit on universal pre-K as a Penfield update, more at our next board meeting, but we wanted to provide a few slides to continue to update our community. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Driffel for some business updates as we continue to start looking towards the next school year in that budget. So robotics donation through its partnership with Bombas, the PHS robotics team donated 2,700 pairs of socks, as well as STEM kits to Happy Birthday Cha-Cha-Cha, which provides birthday gifts for children in need. So again, just all of this great support and back to our own community and beyond. Mrs. Kaiser's fifth grade students at Indian Landing recently started exchanging letters with residents of the friendly home, and they're very excited to receive mail from their new friends. I think that is really cool on so many levels, especially because I know our children don't necessarily get the letters in the mail like maybe we did before email. So I think that's really great to continue that great partnership with the friendly home right here in our community. Art award, the following PHS students were named award winners at the high school art exhibit at Art IT. Sophie Waddy, Dean's Award, Walter East, Medical Illustration Award, Tyler Stamp Warner, American Craft Studio Award, and Haley Layton, Biomedical Photo Communications Award. And just tremendous, absolute talent and hard work to get there. And kudos to our art department, students and parents to make that happen. On with art, the portfolio preparation class at PHS is holding its annual art exhibit from January 27th through February 18th on the first floor of the high school. The reception is being held from 5 to 6 p.m. on Thursday, January 27th. That's just a couple days from now. I encourage you to stop over as board members and district folks, as well as anybody who's interested in seeing our incredible student artwork for the portfolio preparation class. It's very, very amazing and talented work. So I'll shift to our updates. Surprisingly, I'm going to talk about COVID this week a little bit. And we're continuing to update our COVID-19 information page, which includes weekly active cases. I want to just reference that we know, and we're also in tune with the media reports and information coming out of the Monroe County Department of Health. We do continue to meet with them weekly. And the good news is that statewide and in our county, we are seeing a decrease in COVID cases. Now, the numbers that I have to share from our school district don't necessarily show that, but we will be updating again Wednesday. We update the active case list every Wednesday morning. And so if we just look over the last 3 weeks of January, we can see 79 active cases that first week back from break. And then the next week it was 103. And then the next week it was 142. And that involves staff and students. On our webpage, you can see a breakdown of staff and students in each building. But mainly it's students that are active cases. What we're really seeing is that the Omicron and coming back from break everywhere across the state saw a huge surge in COVID numbers, but now things are calming back down again. So I think we'll see, working with the Department of Health, we'll see a decrease in these numbers in our school community as well. And again, additional information around COVID, these numbers and everything else we share can be found on our webpage. Right on the top of the webpage, there's a link, COVID-19 information, and I'll take you right to all of our updates and information. The biggest update and information around COVID now, if you've turned on a television or opened a newspaper, is really just mask mandate confusion. And this really just a little timeline here for our board and our community and what happened. So yesterday was the 24th, and about 7:30 p.m., we all learned at the same time that a New York State Supreme Court judge on Long Island ruled that New York State mask mandates were unconstitutional. The importance of the ruling is that it focused on the process of the mandate, not the effectiveness of masks as a preventative tool for COVID-19. I know that whenever we talk about COVID or masking, there are definitely emotions and understandings and beliefs on sort of both sides of that spectrum. So we're going to continue to follow New York State Department of Health and our county Department of Health. We're going to continue to focus on the CDC and understanding that masks are an effective tool. I don't want to debate that because I think there's lots of, again, emotion and information out there. But at the end of the day, we've got to follow New York State Department of Health. So this ruling was that the mask mandate from the governor was unconstitutional because of the process, not because of effectiveness of masks. So that came out at about 7:30. I started to receive emails, and we were learning it the same time everybody else was. I just want to be, transparent as a superintendent, as a school board. We weren't aware of that ruling. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't have time to plan and figure out what that would mean. So last night, about a half hour after that, all school districts received an email from the New York State Department of Education informing districts that the mask mandate must remain in effect from the New York State Department of Education. So, we have a policy the board approved back in, I think, March of 2020, it's been a while, around COVID-19 protocols. And so part of that policy is making sure that we're following the state rules, the New York State Department of Health rules, the New York State Education Department rules, and our county guidance. And so, we really were last night trying to figure out what does this mean that this Supreme Court, New York State Supreme Court on Long Island made this ruling. And everybody was there trying to figure it out. It was a long, long night last night into the morning, just trying to figure it out. At the end of the day, as a district, we're going to do what we have to do when it comes down in the form of a law or required regulation from New York State. And so that's what we were just trying to determine. So again, the ruling comes out, then we get an email from New York State Department of Education that we need to maintain the mask mandate. This morning, the 25th, the New York State Department of Health and the governor of New York filed a notice of appeal in response to the Supreme Court ruling from yesterday. That appeal went in before the courts opened, and then it was sort of a waiting game on what would happen. So today, a notice of appeal, typically in all cases, a notice of appeal, not always, but the vast majority of times, results in a temporary stay order. And the temporary stay order would mean that the mask mandate would stay in place until the courts have acted upon the appeal. So I can report now, this was all happening pretty fast, but at 2 p.m. today was that hearing, and there was a stay put into place. The stay is, you're going to hear on the news, the stay is through Friday or until the hearing can be held, is our understanding going into this board meeting. And so our understanding is that it is through Friday or until the hearing can be held. So if the hearing ends up being pushed past Friday, the stay would remain in place, and that means that the mask mandate is in place. We already have received communication from the state, from the Department of Health, and from the Department of Education that this does impact all schools, and that the mask mandate needs to stay in place until further notice. So lots of mask confusion, lots of different pieces of information on the media, on social media, through different lenses. And at the end of the day, this district and the board, we're going to follow the mandates and the rules that come to us from New York State. And we've talked about why we need to do that. We have to do that for insurance reasons, that all of our insurance carriers, we agree that we're going to follow the rules that the state puts forth. And so by sort of throwing those out the door, we impact the potential of our insurance to cover us if there were ever to be a lawsuit of any kind. And we just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And I understand, and I know the board understands, and our principals understand, is that the frustration. There are absolutely the feeling that we want to be done with this. We want to be done with masks. We want to be done with all of our COVID precautions. And at the end of the day, the board is not here, nor am I here to argue those points. We understand that everybody's living a different situation, and everybody has a different feeling about it, in a different sense of what they're dealing with in their own family. It's not an easy answer for some who want no masks. There are others in our community that do want masks. And so at the end of the day, I just want to be clear from my office is that we will continue to work with legal counsel and determine to follow the rules set forth by the New York State and New York State Department of Health. We're working through all that. And I know that people want an answer immediately, but when a ruling is made at 7:30 p.m. on a Monday night, it's not going to turn around by Tuesday morning to get a really clear answer. So I just want to say thank you to all of our community around the patience, giving us some time to just make sure we're doing the right thing in order to protect the district and truly to protect our students and staff as well. So that's my update on the mask mandate confusion. And next steps when we talk about this is that we're going to remain focused, as we said in September, that we are not backtracking from in-person instruction with extracurricular activities for all students. That's going to continue to be our #1 goal, is keeping kids in school full time. We can't go back. We're in a really good spot now with COVID numbers coming back down. Things look good. And we're going to continue working with the district's legal counsel to ensure that we are following the required guidance, and that includes masking and distancing protocols. We're working through that. Again, we want to make sure we're doing right by the laws we need to follow, the mandates we need to follow, and that we are protecting the district as well as our students and staff. And then we're going to continue to communicate official changes via emails and our COVID-19 information page, which I talked about just a moment ago. I know there's a lot going on, and you'll see what another district's doing or what the media is reporting. But at the end of the day, what is happening in our schools is going to come from an email and on our webpage from the district. That's where we have to be focused. I have gotten questions on why some districts downstate were able to say no to masking today, or they made it optional. And that is that should change now because the mask mandate is back in place. So again, very difficult decisions. I understand, and I know the board does. Some people are frustrated. Some people want to see the mask stay in place. We're just trying to work through that, and we do again appreciate the community's patience as we just make sure we're doing everything as we're supposed to do. I've got time for questions, and then I'm going to change the slide to talk a little bit about universal pre-K.
All right, thank you. Board members, any questions about what he presented here? Catherine.
Tom, the state ed department sent out that notice last night saying that they anticipate that stay or the appeal, which would initiate the stay. And so therefore they instructed all the school districts to keep the masking mandate in place. And I'm curious about who is the final authority here? I think there was some question about how can the state ed do that if a Supreme Court judge says you can't. So so maybe I think I'll leave the question at that. Maybe you can take it from there. I have some confusion in my mind about that.
Yeah, I am not going to pretend that I have no confusion on that situation. I think we all do, and that's the appreciation of patience as we try to work through it. So what's interesting is that, and SED pointed this out in their email to districts, is that there was the Long Island court case, but there was also previous to that an Albany County court case that upheld the mask mandate. And so they were trying to figure out which court system is better. So this was a county, the New York State Supreme Court officials are in different counties. And so this wasn't our county, it was downstate. So there were questions on whether that would be for the whole state. Mm-hmm. If a New York State Supreme Court made that decision and the Albany County decision wasn't in place, then the answer we've received is then that would mean the whole state has to follow that. Because there was a contradicting Supreme Court ruling that it was upheld earlier, then that's where the contradiction comes into play.
I see.
So, and I just want to point out is, we use thinking at the federal level, the Supreme Court is the top court of the land. And in New York State, that's not the case. That's a court of appeals. And, the Supreme Courts are like by county, and it's equivalent to federal district courts. And they oftentimes, they rule in opposite directions, and it goes through this similar process. So this is a county state Supreme Court ruled one way, and a county state Supreme Court ruled a different way.
Okay.
And this appealing process is to try to resolve those opinions.
Okay. And so that's why we're relying so heavily on our legal counsel, because I got confused, as to who we need. Okay.
I think Mark brings up a really good point. And I do think that, I think you've got I'm going to call our U.S. history teachers at the high school and say, Mark deserves an A. Because of that piece of, when we hear Supreme Court, we immediately think of the highest court in the land being the federal Supreme Court. In New York State, that's different. You're right. So the Supreme Court makes a decision, but then it goes to the appellate court, which is above the Supreme Court. So that's where we're trying to figure out, what does that look like? And so it will take time. So the reality is that the stay is in place now, that one option that can happen is that the appellate court will uphold the Long Island Supreme Court's ruling, and then it is not necessarily an automatic mask become optional, because then it is a conversation, at least with school districts typically can have a policy above and beyond what the law stands. I'm not saying we're doing that. I'm just saying it's not an easy, as soon as that, if that is the ruling, that they're going to support the Supreme Court ruling, then automatically it happens. I'm sure we'll have to, again, continue to have conversations with legal counsel on what that means. And I just want to, for whatever it is worth, and I know I speak for the board and the district, is that none of us got into this to try to police mask mandates. That we understand truly how some people are frustrated, but I also understand that some people aren't frustrated. They like the mask mandates. That's why they feel comfortable sending their kids to school or coming into our schools to teach and educate. So it definitely is not an easy answer where everybody wants this. We've got to make sure we're doing the right thing, and at the end of the day, following the law. That's what we're going to do. Our legal counsel was involved. Our legal counsel, which also represents obviously a number of districts in the county, multiple legal counsels were talked to in terms of making sure that even saying that masking was required today in school, we had the authority to do that. And so, we're going to work through this. It'll be a very busy next few days as we monitor that court case and see what happens next. And again, I just appreciate the patience as we all try to work through this and make sure we're doing the right thing legally and doing the right thing for all of our community.
Board members, and any more questions on this?
I do.
Go ahead, Catherine.
If no one else does.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Tom, do you happen to know the role in the, in the level of authority that the Monroe County Department of Health has in relation to what the state may or may not say?
So the county Department of Health, and I look at Dr. Driffel because he's really good with this too, but the county Department of Health can make recommendations. They can't make an order. That being said, the county can call put the county into an emergency situation, which we are in now. And I believe Erie County actually came out and made a mask mandate for the county itself. So I think they can do that, but they haven't, and I don't anticipate that happening.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be the county Department of Health, but it would be the county itself at the executive level of the county to issue a mask mandate for the county. I do not anticipate that that's happening, but that would be how the county would be able to actually, make a decision. Right now, they really are through the Department of Health making recommendations and guidance for school districts in the county.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Again, any other comments? Okay, thank you, Tom. I think we're ready for the next step.
Okay, so I'm gonna shift. And I want to make sure my screen is still going to be shared.
Yep.
So I think, do you guys now see universal pre-K? Okay. So I will turn this over to Dr. Maloney, who's going to walk us through some slides as an update for the board and the community around our goal of starting universal pre-K this fall.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. So we've got some exciting news in terms of universal pre-K for next week, but I want to give a little bit of a background to the board and to the community. So next year, we are hoping to implement pre-K. It is a New York State grant-funded program, and it will operate within local community-based organizations. So that means already established daycares and childcare programs. So it will be a full-day program, 5.5 hours, including meals, and offering a social, emotional, and play-based curriculum aligned with the New York State pre-kindergarten standards. And the way that the grant works through New York State through SED, Penfield has 116 UPK spots allocated. And the program will be open to children who will be 4 years old on or before December 1st, 2022. And we will be using an equitable lottery system in order to select students. And we're currently in the process where we are reviewing requests for proposals. We've received requests for proposals, from a number of community-based organizations. We're in the process of reviewing those RFPs and making decisions. I have to say I've been working with a highly invested UPK stakeholder group that's comprised of parents, kindergarten teachers, building principals, and early childhood experts. They have been providing feedback as we've gone through the process. I'd like to walk you through the timeline of where we're currently at in terms of this implementation. Dr. Putnam, if you wouldn't mind changing to the next slide. So here's where the big news comes. Next week on February 2nd, we will be hosting a virtual community information session. And this session will give all the details around UPK and how families can enroll. We'll have an opportunity for families to ask questions and have their questions answered. And this is going to be a virtual information session. And a huge thank you to our Director of Communications, Mrs. Bradstreet. She has been helping me get the word out. You'll start to see on we're going to have a social media plug and information going out to families around how to log into that virtual community information session. And then our open enrollment will be February 7th through February 28th. You'll be able to go to the webpage and get the application and apply. The beginning of March, our lottery selection process will take place. And our goal is for the first part of April for families to be notified of acceptance. And then there is the formal registration process anytime a student comes into the district, similar to kindergarten registration, the same for UPK registration. There's that formal registration that needs to occur. And then our goal is for September for UPK to start. And I have to say, this entire process has been spearheaded by Mary Sapone, who is our pre-CSE chair, and Taylor Ramsey, who is a current primary teacher at Harris Hill, working on her admin internship. And they both have a passion for early intervention and early primary education, and they have gone above and beyond to really make sure that we have followed all of the right steps in terms of implementing UPK. So I just wanted to give a quick overview to families and to the board, letting you know where we're at, and to start spreading the word on the virtual community information session next week on February 2nd. And that will be from 6 to 7 p.m. And again, it will be virtual. Any questions?
Board members, questions? Emily?
You know, I think I asked this before, but I forgot the answer. How long the grant is for?
That's a really great question. Dr. Driffel, is there my understanding is as long as we take advantage of the grant, is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's awarded on an annual basis. I'm actually going to touch on this in a few minutes. But yeah, last year it became a new program for districts across the state due to the quick turnaround. We weren't able to implement it for this 21-22 school year. But as far as we know, this is now written in as a baseline funding allocation.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Are we going to be including postings about this in some of our low income areas as well that may not have access or may not be on social media?
Yep. So we've actually got a flyer created. It's going to have the QR code that goes right to the application, and we're going to post it all over. We've actually been working with other districts who have implemented UPK and their advice on how do we reach all families, particularly families who maybe low-income families or families who are not currently a part of the district. How do we ensure that families that don't have current students, how do we ensure that they are aware of the program? So I just met with George English today. We've got huge signs going up. There will be one here at district office and at each of the elementaries as well as PHS. And Mrs. Bradstreet's helping us connect with various media outlets in order to really get the word out.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Board members, any other questions? Lisa.
Hi. Nice to see you tonight, Dr. Maloney. Curious about, do we have an idea of the numbers, maybe from a census? And, if we have 116 spots, do we know how many potential spots families could be interested in? I also wondered if we're providing transportation, which we might have talked about, but I can't recall. Thank you.
So no, we are not providing transportation. That's a great question. And we really, at this point, we do not know how many families are interested. That's where we'll need to see the numbers in terms of the application process. We have been working, as I mentioned, with neighboring districts, and we think the 116, we think we'll be able to fill all of those spots.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other board members? Leslie, I have a question. Many times when you look at that age, people go pick daycare based on, in some respects, availability, convenience. For UPK, will the same residency requirements apply to UPK as it does to a normal student, above PK student?
Yes, that's a great question, Mark. Yes, the same residency requirements are for UPK as K through 12.
Thank you. Anyone else? Catherine. I'm on mute, Catherine. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Maloney, you mentioned the lottery, the equitable lottery. And has that system been figured out yet? Or how do you ensure the randomness of it?
So that's another great question. And I will say I'm incredibly thankful to Mary and Taylor. They have done a lot of legwork connecting with other districts to find a process. And actually, Mary connected with State Ed and to hear their recommendations on how to ensure that the lottery is equitable. Families will actually, on the application, have the opportunity to indicate which site sites they are interested in. And then it will literally be random pulling and matching up, which goes to whether the family's interested in this site and this slot. So, yeah, that's another great question, but we've been very fortunate. Our neighboring districts have shared their processes, and Mary actually reached out to State Ed too. So,
okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Dr. Maloney. This is something that's been talked about for a long time, and it's finally going to arrive.
Yeah.
I know, it's very exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back to, I'll turn it over to Dr. Driffel for business updates.
Thanks, Dr. Putnam. Good evening, board. Hope everybody's doing well. So some budget development updates tonight. We're going to spend most of our time looking at revenue analysis as it relates to the tax cap formula for local funding, and from Governor Hochul's executive budget proposal that she put forth and what the impact is for Penfield Central. And then we'll kind of just quickly touch on some of the expenditure knowns and unknowns at this point. And then I want to just speak to that first responder volunteer property tax exemption that we heard in the special report earlier tonight from Mr. Bertone and Mr. Jeffries. So now that we're after the turn of the calendar year, the budget development process really begins in earnest. We've set the calendar, we've identified factors, goals, and guidelines. We've reviewed fund balance in our reserve plan. All of the buildings and departments have submitted their budget requests. So now we're in that yellow stage where we're really looking at that months-long revenue projection, keeping an ear towards Albany, what's happening with negotiations with the legislature and the budget, refining those appropriations, that cost budget, as we learn more about enrollment and staffing needs and pupil needs, and as more information fleshes out. At our next board meeting, we'll have a full draft budget to review to match to the revenue information that we'll have available tonight, and then a second draft iteration thereafter. And then finally, when we get to April, we'll have a proposed budget for the board to consider putting forward to the community come that third Tuesday in May when we vote. So then that's all the legal requirements in our budget hearing and vote. A little bit down the road, but not too far away. It'll be here before you know it. So the first point of discussion tonight that I want to review is the local levy limit legislation, commonly called the tax cap. So this will be the 11th year of this program now. So it's been in effect for over a decade. Here's just a quick review of this very simple formula that we've all come to know and love. We take last year's tax levy, you add any prior year reserve offset or reserve amount. So this is what happens if you accidentally levy more than you should have by the prior year formula. We've never been in that situation. It's very rare around the state, but there is a mechanism in place for that. The first impactful calculation is multiplying by that tax-based growth factor there in the middle. So this is the number that comes from the State Department of Tax and Finance, which in theory accounts for all new permitted growth within a school locality in the prior year. So we are going to review that on the next slide. We add in any pilots. Oh, keep going. We're not done with that calculation, Dr. Piper. There's a little bit to go. So then you add in pilots receivable in the prior fiscal year. You subtract any capital tax levy exclusion available. We did not have one last year, and I don't anticipate that we'll have one this year. And then you can also add in any prior year tort exclusion. That's if you are subject to a lawsuit that is greater than 5% of your annual operating cost. So that does not affect us. So then the big one is multiplying by that allowable levy growth factor. That's the limit that's held to 2% as a max, measured by prior calendar year consumer price index, CPI, the inflation measure. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail on a forthcoming slide. Then we subtract pilots receivable in the coming fiscal year. That's notable because in this upcoming fiscal year, we have 2 new pilots that are coming online that have been approved by the County of Monroe Industrial Development Agency. So last year we had 2 pilots. Those are payments in lieu of taxes. and next year we'll have 4. And then we add in any available carryover. If you recall, last year we were the only school district in the county that kept our tax levy flat. So there is a mechanism by which we can carry over some of those dollars that we foregone last year in the tax levy. So last year we were able to raise our tax levy about $1.4 million. We chose not to. And in the calculation, it'll allow us to carry over $1 million this year should we need it. So that brings us to the tax levy limit. You can then add in any coming year exclusions that are expected. At this point, I do not expect any coming year exclusions. So that will bring us to the maximum allowable tax levy limit. So now we can go to the next slide to look at kind of that first impactful part of the calculation, and that's the tax-based growth factors. So what I did is take a look at this provided figure from the State Department of Tax and Finance and look at all of the Monroe County school districts. This is lower than we've been in the past at that 1.016. So, a little over 0.1% in new growth. We've typically here at Penfield been kind of in that Rush, Henrietta, Pittsburgh range where we've been at 0.6% or 0.7%. I don't know what accounts for this. All we get is the number. We don't get any reporting behind it. Obviously with COVID, there was a lot of construction stalls and starts. So I don't know if that factored into it. I do anticipate with some of the new approvals that we've been seeing in the community that this will jump back up next year. But I just wanted the board to be aware that this is a little less than what we've seen in the past. It's an important metric, but just for information at this point, it's just one part of the calculation. The next major part of the calculation is that allowable levy growth factor. So that's the CPI number. So you can see all 11 years of the tax cap legislation there, what the rate of inflation was in that third column. So for this calendar year, 2021, the average rate of inflation on a year-over-year by month basis was 4.7%. A lot of people were confused. They said, oh, in December, the inflation was 7%. But the way the state calculates that is it's on a month-by-month basis. So that January 2021 was a year-to-date reflection from January 2020. So it was kind of more of a ceteris paribus kind of status quo condition, 1.4, 1.7. What happened in March of 2020? Who knows? So that jumps up to 2.6. It jumps up to 4.2, and then throughout the year we had those increases, which brings us to the 4.7 average. Obviously, looking at that table on the left, the 4.7% inflation is far and away the greatest amount we've had since this legislation's been in effect, and we're capped at a 2% increase. So it doesn't take a math expert to realize that, hey, if costs are increasing at 4.7%, or maybe more accurately, more recently, 7%, and we can only raise revenue by 2%, that could potentially be problematic. So I know that some of the state advocacy organizations like NISBA and NISCUS, ASBO are working with legislators to help them understand that we're kind of living in a new world right now, and that this is a complicated scenario. But I wanted the board to at least be armed with the knowledge to know where these numbers are coming from and put them in a historical context. So here actually is the local levy tax cap formula for next year. So I'll just kind of recite it, walk through it. So we have our prior year levy, which was the same as the year before that, $66,895,988. You multiply that by that tax-based growth factor number to come to a little over 67 million. You add in your prior year pilots. So last year we had $163,000 in pilots. You subtract out any prior year exclusions, which we did not have. You then multiply by that allowable growth factor. Again, that's capped at that 2%. So it's not 4.7 to come up to $68.5 million. You subtract out your pilots in the coming year. As I mentioned, we're going from 2 pilots to 4 pilots. So you can see that the pilot revenue is scheduled to increase there about $35,000. And then you add in that available carryover. So as I mentioned before, because we kept our levy flat last year, the calculation does allow us to carry over about 2/3 of the levy opportunity that we had last year, to bring us to $69,334,282 is a maximum allowable levy limit. That represents a little over $2.4 million in new revenue, and on a year-over-year percentage basis, it would represent 3.64%. So at this point, I'm not committed to a levy of 3.64%. There's still too much to be determined on the expenditure side of the budget. That'll determine how much local revenue that we will need to fund the budget for next year. But at this point, I wanted the board to at least be aware that this is the calculation. This is what we actually have to submit to the state comptroller tax and finance department by March 1st. So at least it provides us with a guardrail of where we know that cap formula is going to be. And it's hard to see anybody, but before I go on, I kind of want to make sure everybody is at least understanding where we're at with the formula.
Board members, any questions on that? Lisa.
Hey, Dan, can you remind me where the tax-based growth factor comes from? I know it's given to us, but what is it based on? Is it business growth or housing developments or both?
Yeah, it's based on permanent new development, which could be commercial, it could be residential. The one thing it doesn't include is any new development associated with pilots. There has been legislation advocacy to include that in there. But it's typically just permitted new growth. And again, we don't get the backup detail on that. As far as I know, the local assessors don't get the backup detail on that. It's just a number that comes straight from the state.
So Dan, actually, could I follow up on that? If they reassess, does that affect the growth factor?
No. So we'll get into that maybe in the next meeting or so when we start talking about tax rates and assessments and equalization rates.
Right.
But as far as we can tell, this is only just new assessment tacked on from the prior year. So it's not a change in taxable value. It would actually be new growth.
Thank you. Board members, any more questions about the computation on the tax levy tax limit? Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to start to turn my attention over to the governor's proposal, but first, because it's so directly related to the issue of local funding, I wanted to make the board aware, community aware, because I haven't seen a lot of reporting on this yet. But in the governor's executive budget proposal was this new homeowner tax rebate credit program. It works very similar from what I can read in the legislation to the property tax relief credit that was in effect from 2016 to 2019. How it works is that, at least previously in the property tax relief credit, if a school district stayed within the tax cap and homeowners in that community were eligible for one of the STAR programs, the basic STAR or the enhanced STAR, and then also based on their household adjusted gross income, they would be eligible for a tax rebate credit issued in the form of a check that would come in the fall. It is going to be tiered by income. It's the same for income tiers that it was a handful of years ago. So it's household adjusted gross income below $75,000. Second tier is $75,000 to $150,000, $150,000 to $200,000, and then $200,000 to $250,000. Anybody like the STAR program that has household AGI above $250,000 would not be eligible for this. And it's based on your eligibility in your basic or enhanced STAR. So last year, the basic STAR program entitlement for residents of the Penfield town here was about $730. So what they're saying in this proposed homeowner tax rebate credit is that based on your income tier, you'll get a percentage of that STAR savings. And it could be up to $700, $500, $300. So it's going to be a substantial reduction in any kind of local tax liability. So I think this is something that should be on the board's radar. I think it should be something that the community is reaching out to their legislators as the spring evolves to see if we can make sure this rebate does become law come April. So let's talk a little bit more about the governor's executive budget proposal. So it's a proposed $216.3 billion all funds budget plan. The most important takeaway from all of the documentation and the speeches that were put forward by the governor and her team was just that there's a massive significant improvement in New York State's fiscal standing. So we're projecting as a state operational surpluses in the 3 out years, even after this fiscal year. And since, at least for the last 15 years, there's never been a year where we're not projecting a deficit. Most of you were sitting at this table with us last year, and we were talking about 20% aid reductions and $40 billion budget deficits. And now the state, in their budget plan, is planning to put money back in the community in the form of this property tax rebate credit, add money to the rainy day reserve so that they're more insulated and guarded against future long tail risks like we saw with COVID. So it's just a sea change in messaging from what we saw a year ago. The general fund operations of that $216 billion all funds budget account to $118 billion. Of the 118, 31.2 billion is earmarked for pre-K through 12th grade education. That's an increase of $2.1 billion year over year. It does fulfill that commitment to the legislature's commitment last year to the 3-year phase-in of the foundation aid formula. So this is year 2. That lawsuit was settled back in October, as we discussed. And then, as we discussed at our November meeting, to the dollar, and the governor's initial aid run is what we were projected to receive for next year. Of that $2.1 billion increase for education, $1.6 billion is for the foundation aid. Districts that are fully funded relative to the foundation aid formula are proposed to get a 3% increase. We talk a lot about, here at Penfield and some of the surrounding Monroe County districts, how underfunded we've been relative to this formula. But across the state, there are hundreds of school districts that are technically, by way of the formula, overfunded. So in this proposal, they're being held harmless. So they're not seeing an aid reduction, and they're just seeing a 3% increase in their foundation aid. Unlike previous years, we're seeing no proposed adjustments to the expense-driven aid categories that the prior governor had always proposed. So that means BOCES aid, transportation aid, those formulas will run intact where we receive money back in the next fiscal year after spending that out. An applicable tenet of the budget proposal was that all school buses sold must be zero emission by 2027, and none would be allowable on the road by 2035. The budget also forgives prior clerical errors that resulted in lost education aid. So this was a hang up again of the former governor that seemed overly punitive of a punishment, where if you just missed a deadline or somebody didn't sign something correctly, if the right T wasn't crossed or the right I wasn't dotted, districts were potentially losing millions of dollars in aid. So the Governor Hochul is proposing to forgive those clerical errors. I did mention on the previous slide that $2.2 billion property tax rebate is currently proposed as a one-time rebate. So it wouldn't be a multi-year program, it would just be a one-time program this fall. There was a lot in the governor's budget regarding workforce development as it relates to education and healthcare and many other sectors, but it lifts the earnings cap for retirees through June 2024 to help us out with retiree substitutes coming back to work. So here's what the budget impact is specifically for Penfield Central in the governor's budget. Again, that really large increase in foundation aid, that 24% increase over $3 million. UPK, as Dr. Maloney discussed earlier and Emily asked about, is the funding levels for that. There was at least some hope at the state level that might increase. And obviously at the federal level with the domestic spending legislation that had been negotiated, there was a big focus on universal pre-K. Maybe that would be federal money that would flow to the states, and then if so, flow to us. But at this point, it does look like we are still beholden to the same formula that was last year. So that's that 116 students at that $5,500 amount each. BOCES aid projects to be down quite a bit, but I'm not confident in this projection. So the governor takes her data from early November, and since then, It's been almost 3 months since then. I'm confident that this number will be more like $3.7 million, a little bit less than the aid that it was last year, because in the 2020 year, we had such a massive influx of those laptop purchases that resulted in so much aid last year. But I do expect that to be more than what the governor is currently projecting. Excess cost aids relates to special programming for kiddos with IEPs or 504 plans. So that's kind of a modest increase of 3.38%. Instructional materials aid, that's our textbook aid, our software aid, our hardware aid, library aid, projects to be up a little bit based on an increase in student enrollment. Those dollars are driven directly by the amount of students that are attending our schools. Transportation aid looks high at $4.5 million for next year, a 17% increase. But unlike BOCES, I actually project this to be about $500,000 less. So it's kind of a wash between the BOCES projection and the transportation projection. Just based on a driver shortage, budgeted dollars that we had for bus drivers are not being spent because we cannot fill those positions. So I expect that reciprocating aid to be a little bit less than the projected spend. And then our building aid is just the aid we get back on capital projects, flat year over year, more or less, in accordance with our debt service schedules. So overall, while UPK is not a general fund aid that's accounted for in a separate grant, you can see a substantial aid increase of about $3 million or over 10% year over year. So other revenue projections, county sales taxes are the receipts that we're seeing come in from Monroe County and Wayne County. Wayne County shares some sales taxes with us as well because we have property out there substantially increasing. So we're seeing and projecting an increase for next year of almost 8%, bringing us up over to $4.2 million. And then all other revenue, all up, all in for the district, also projecting an increase. So that relates to just health services, it relates to admissions, it relates to driver's ed, it's Medicaid reimbursements, it's interest and earnings on our bank accounts, as it looks like the Fed's prepared to move forward with some rate hikes in this calendar year. So the revenue takeaways are just, I don't see any scenario by which we would need to exceed the tax cap for local funding this year. So I think that's positive news. There are a lot of districts around the state, depending on how much state aid they're getting, given that 2% cap and the massive cost increases that they're seeing, that are seriously going to have to consider breaking the cap this year. I think it could be the most we've had since that legislation went into effect. Most of our residents would be eligible for that tax rebate credit if it is passed. So whatever tax increase that we were to pass along to the community, by and large, a lot of it would be offset by that potential state rebate. So it just makes it a little bit of a more palatable proposition. So we have substantial revenue available for 22, 23, obviously here through these different forecasts. But the one thing I want to stress at this point is that future revenue growth is far from guaranteed. We do have that commitment next year, 23, 24 would be the third year of that phase in of foundation aid formula. But everybody at this table knows that we're subject to different headwinds that we can't control. So it's an election year. We don't know what's going to happen with our state officials, local officials. It's hard to say what exactly is going to happen with economic conditions. Right now, the state's in great shape. Last year was bad shape. We're going to stay on the sunny side of the hope there, but no guarantees. So this current year looks good. But it's not going to be a permanent thing. And what we don't want to do is set ourselves up for a future funding cliff if funding dries up. So I just want to briefly touch on the other side of the ledger, the expenditure budget. We'll talk about this much more at our next meeting. But at this point, there are many undetermined factors. We've been building preliminary forecasts via ongoing conversations, staffing conversations at the building level, going through budget requests from our different departments. The major cost drivers for next year are going to be wage pressures. It's not just the increase in minimum wage, but it's the pressures that we're seeing from the labor market and the general labor shortage. And we're seeing pressure from the private sector where people can go make money over here, go make money over there. And you can see on our job opportunities available on our website that we're looking for help. We're looking for good people. So there are just some general wage pressures that are going to be factoring in next year's budget. And then, as I just discussed earlier on with the CPI, we have general inflationary trends. So contractual costs are increasing, gasoline costs are increasing, energy costs are increasing, supplies, materials, paper, printer, toner, all of the little kind of materials and supplies that make up, a large organization like this, we're seeing substantial cost increases on. So knowns and unknowns for the expenditure side of the budget. So as I mentioned before, we do have those budget requests submitted. We're filtering through those with the various offices. We know at least half of next fiscal year's health insurance premiums. So the way the consortium builds the budgets is on a calendar basis. So we know for sure what the premiums are going to be from July to December, but we don't know necessarily what they're going to be from next January to next June. We do know what the workers' compensation premiums are going to be. That consortium continues to perform very well. We're actually going to see another reduction in the premiums on workers' comp, just like we did last year. The ERS employer contribution rate, as we discussed back in November, is down quite a bit. It's going to be down to 11% this year, substantial decrease. And I know at this point that we're not planning any other budget propositions for the May vote. So we will not be voting on a project. We will not be voting to create a new capital reserve. And unlike prior years, we are not going to move forward with a bus purchase in May. So we have working very closely with the transportation department. We'll discuss this more at our next meeting because our director, Mr. Gallo, will be there so he can answer any questions on this. But based on just reduced mileage in some of our fleet from our bus driver shortage, we're confident we can skip a year in our maintenance schedule and not have to go out and buy any buses this year. So the unknowns, no BOCES budget data is available at this point. We have a meeting on Thursday with their finance personnel to discuss. They're giving us a forewarning, like we discussed, is that they're seeing trouble with the labor market. They're seeing wage pressures. And then, as you know, we get their costs passed along to us in our budget. So we might see some larger than expected BOCES increased costs. We have extensive collective bargaining outstanding with contracts expiring at year end. We still don't know for sure what the TRS employer contribution rate is going to be. We know the range, but that'll be finalized hopefully in the next couple weeks. And then learner needs, matching that staffing, matching the enrollment needs through annual reviews, the scaffolding needs that we're putting around our students with the SEL focus. All that still needs to be a little bit more further refined. And then in most prior years, the legislative budget was always different than the executive budget. So one of the things that we're going to keep an eye on this year is, given the fact that Governor Hochul put forward what the education advocates were calling for in her budget, will there be any modifications in the legislative budget? And at this point, I don't think we know, but it's possible we'll see operational changes or financial changes that come out of that budget come April time. So next steps, spring long advocacy from the Board of Education and Dr. Putnam. As I mentioned at our next meeting, we'll review the full budget expenditure draft, and our Director of Transportation will be there to kind of do a deep dive into transportation, not just on the budget, but able to answer maybe some questions from the board as it relates to their operational status. That levy limit is submitted to the state agencies by March 1st. We also have a board meeting on March 1st, so we'll have further budget updates for the board to consider it then. And again, on March 22nd, the state budget, the legislative budget that as mentioned, is due on April 1st. And then we, in accordance with our budget development calendar, plan to have a proposed budget for board consideration for adoption come April 12th. So a handful, a couple more meetings to go, a lot more budget information to come. And at this point, I would just open it up to any kind of board discussion from tonight's materials.
Thank you, Dan. Board members, any questions or comments? Okay, I have at least one here. And when you talk about one of the proposals was electric buses by 27. That's really just 5 years out. I guess the fortunate thing is it's given us a bit of advance warning when we're right in the position we're going to build a new bus garage, so we can design some of those accommodations into the bus garage. But there may be additional costs that for going electric. If you have to put ways, if hardware for distributing power, large amounts of power. Do you know if there's any talk about funding or grants or state money for the infrastructure required to put in electric buses?
Yep, the governor's proposal did say that all of the associated infrastructure costs would be aidable. So charging stations, laying conduit, other associated maintenance provisions for electric vehicles. The other thing they did change as well was the lease provisions. So right now we're capped at a 5-year lease if we wanted to lease a bus, and that was extended out to 10 years to kind of smooth the costs associated with potentially electrifying a fleet. There was also notes in the state budget that said that grant opportunities, extra funding opportunities would become available, but there was no specifics on that at this point. I think it would be incumbent upon the legislature to act on that timeline, and then we'll probably see more fleshed out proposals.
Good, thank you. And the, I can't remember if you said the cap for retiree income. I forget what that cap is now, but is that something that would benefit us in terms of bus drivers, or where would we see the benefit in let's say called the suspension of the cap for retirees?
It theoretically could affect bus drivers. I think more so it's going to affect the instructional side. So substitutes, substitute teachers, substitute administrators. I think that's probably where we'll see more of an effect, but certainly all staff could benefit from that.
Those were just the few items. Again, board members, any questions or comments? All right, good. Thank you, Dr. Triffle.
Yep, just one more thing. Just kind of speaking to the special report that we saw earlier from representatives from the Penfield and Brighton fire departments. Dr. Putnam, if you could skip a slide. So the new state legislation that they spoke to is for 66K. It did become effective January 1st of this year. This specific for 66K only relates to Monroe County, but as they did mention, there are counties around the state that have in prior years adopted the same sort of exemption. Taxing jurisdictions, so not just school districts, towns, villages, must opt into the exemption. It's not an automatic thing. As they discuss, it does reduce eligible homeowners assessments by 10%. It does not reduce revenue to Penfield Central. It just spreads to those other households, as they so astutely pointed out. Those folks must be in service to those organizations for at least 2 years, and it must be for their primary residence. At 20 years of eligible service, that exemption could become permanent. That's an option that's written into the legislation. We are working to ascertain the fiscal impact. At this point, kind of like they had mentioned, and based on our diligence, we think there's maybe about 70 folks that might be eligible at about $30,000 of exempted dollars, which based on our number of households, we do think it would be under $2 or so per household on average over the course of a year. So not a large financial impact, but philosophically something that we'll want to discuss. As they talked about, the opt-in deadline is March 1st. It does require a public hearing. So I think you said, Mark, that maybe we'll touch on that new business, but I wanted to make sure it was at least brought to the board's attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we'll cover that in a bit, but it was interesting to note that this is Monroe County. So for the individuals to get this, they have to be residents of our district and within the county.
Correct.
Because we do have a portion of the district that is outside the county. Okay.
So that concludes superintendent reports.
Thank you, Tom. Let's see here. Where are we? We're at change orders, section 5A. You have the change orders listed below, and it is recommended that the board approve these change orders. The above change orders have been reviewed by and are supported by architect Vic Tomaselli, project manager Gary Huffman, clerk of the works George English, and assistant superintendent for business and finance Dr. Dan Driffel. So may I have a motion and a second that the change orders as described above be approved?
So moved.
All right, Lisa, and second?
I'll second.
Kristen, thank you so much. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And we are at the agreement with the Penfield School Transportation Association. It is recommended that the board approve the agreement between the Penfield School Transportation Association and the Penfield Central School District effective July 1st, 2021 and through June 30th, 2024. So may I have a motion and a second that the board approves the agreement between the Penfield School Transportation Association and the Penfield Central School District effective July 21st through July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I think it was Lisa, Emily, and Catherine. Thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. The course description guide, which you have presented to you, we have a motion and a second that the 2022-23 high school course description guide be approved as presented on January 11th, 2022.
So moved.
Barb?
Second.
Catherine, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Policies for first read. We have two policies for first read, 7611 children with disabilities and 7614 preschool special education program. Would someone like to speak to that?
I'm happy to do that on behalf of the policy committee. Pretty minor changes in these two policies, really just cleaning up some language. We did change the title of the policy, Children with Disabilities, to Students with Disabilities, which is focused on obviously the educational side of what we do. And then just a minor change in really the wording. We took out a sentence in the front of each policy. It goes on about what the board recognizes things and just focus it on the board supports a system of services offered. So really just some cleanup language, but nothing that changes the heart of either policy.
Thank you. Any other comments?
No.
Questions? Okay. So now we have policies for second read and approval.
So these policies we discussed last meeting around our harassment, discrimination, and bullying, and the Dignity for All Students Act, and the regulation that goes with the Dignity for All Students Act, also known as DASA. We have not gotten any additional feedback, so the changes we discussed last week would stay in effect.
Thank you. So may I have a motion and a second that the above policies be approved as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We have policy for third read and approval. The 7266 limited disclosure of student director information. It was just the one policy, then there's the regulation that supports it.
So we brought this back. That's why it's a third read. After we did, this was in the second reading last meeting, but we held off on approving or bringing it to a vote. We wanted to clean it up a little bit more. So really the change here is around, this is really focused on, again, directory information that can be shared. And that has to do with some things, including the military. They do have, the federal government has a rule that we have to provide that information once students are old enough to the federal government for military purposes, recruitment, but parents can opt out, and that process can be cleaned up a little bit to make it more clear. The other is around the use of images of students for social media, for Twitter and Facebook. We do have the opportunity for parents to opt out, but we really went back and fine-tuned this to make it clear. So moving forward, if this policy is approved, principals will be sending out a form every September, Microsoft form, making it clear on how parents can opt their students out of being on any of those images that we would share on our district Facebook page or in other programs, pictures that we have up on when we do the board meetings. And so that's really trying to clarify that. I will say the other piece that the policy committee discussed is that this policy will be reviewed again next year as we still are trying to work through the best way to be able to showcase the wonderful things that are happening in our schools and also, make sure that we're also protecting students in regards to the use of social media. So I will share with you that the district is looking at some outside vendors that do things that basically create classroom pages and communication. And one thing we could do is potentially use something like that to share photos with families that are happening during the school day. But that's not, we're still working through that process. So this policy, I would say, is up for approval. The policy committee feels comfortable with it, but also acknowledges that we want to keep working on it as a district.
Good. Well, thank you. Any other questions or comments on that? So may I have a motion and a second that the above policy be approved as presented?
So moved.
Barb? Emily, I got you. And so we talk about questions, comments, any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Which brings us to visitor speaking time. We as a board appreciate the comments of the community during public session of the board meeting. Every individual that speaks has a vested interest in the education of our students. Your comments are important to us. Matters involving particular individuals or specifics of negotiations are not permitted during public session. Concerns raised will be referred to the district administration for follow-up or action when appropriate. Visitors may sign up to speak by emailing the district clerk, Sharon Erkfitz, with their name, address, telephone number, and topic they wish to address. Registration will open at 8 a.m. on Friday, the Friday before the meeting, and remain open until 3 p.m. on the Tuesday of the board meeting. Speakers are expected to identify themselves with their name and address before presenting and limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. A total of 30 minutes will be allotted for visitor speaking time. The board will not be responding to comments during this session, but please be assured we are listening. Finally, we ask all speakers to model the conduct we expect of our students in school daily. Please be respectful of others in your words, conduct, and demeanor. Thank you. So we have one speaker, and this is Anne-Marie Scarson.
And I'm letting her in now. So she'll be here
See
shortly out of
her
the way.
image, yes. Hey, hello, Anne-Marie. Please state your name and address, and let's listen to you.
Just connecting now. Hi, Anne-Marie, are you there?
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you all for having me. Quite the full meeting, guys. My name is Anne-Marie Scorsone, and I reside at 11 Creekside Circle in Penfield. I am a member of the Penfield Anti-Racist Alliance. The group is known as PARA, And for those of you unfamiliar with PARA, PARA is an inclusive, anti-racist, multicultural, educational, community-focused group that recognizes the destructive effects of racism on all members of our community. We commit to full participation, shared power, and holding each other accountable. We invite diversity and inclusion in all forms. We champion anti-racist structures, policies, and practices that maximize the potential of our community. We demand a future without racism and oppression that empowers all members of our community to use their creativity in an equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment. I want to thank the board for their presentations this evening on new developments in terms of DEI focus on curriculum. However, it is important to note that recent interactions between students and school district faculty and staff continue to demonstrate the ongoing DEI crisis in our school district. There are still issues with BIPOC students being singled out in classrooms, hate speech targeted at BIPOC and LGBTQ+ students. Personally, school buses are a huge part of the issue for my children, and I've contacted the transportation department and school administrators numerous times related to busing incidences where hate speech and bullying were used with my neighborhood BIPOC students and those who are LGBTQ. PARA is poised and ready to assist any school DEI committee to reach their goal. We would love to help in any way possible. PARA members are hoping to assist as parent representatives for the K-12 humanity teacher on special assignment interviews. And as a mother of BIPOC children, I am concerned for our students. Black and brown children continue to bear the weight of the district's slow rollout of DEI activities. When possible, please provide an update on DEI activities, the cultural responsive sustaining education framework. My questions are really, are teachers getting trained in the resources that they need to implement the new curriculum now? PARA would like to set up a time with Ms. Tasha Potter and Dr. Maloney to discuss the district's progress in meeting your DEI and CRS milestones. And finally, we welcome any school administrators, teachers, parents, and our community at large to reach out to us. We can be found on Facebook or reached by email through our Gmail account. Thank you for your time and letting me participate.
Thank you, Ms. Scarson. That concludes our visitor speaking time, which brings us to discussion about board candidates. The terms of the Board of Education members, Ms. Barb Babiarts and Ms. Emily Belcher, will expire on June 30th, 2022. The term of office for a board member is 3 years. Board candidate nomination petitions may be obtained at the district office beginning on February 28th, 2022. 61 signatures of qualified voters are needed on the petition, which must be filed with the clerk no later than 5 p.m. on April 18th, 2022. Candidates should supply their personal biographical data and a statement of qualifications and issues to the district clerk by April 11th, 2022 to meet the printing deadlines for the budget newsletter. The annual Monroe County School Board Association Prospective School Board Candidate Seminar has been scheduled for Saturday, March 26, 2022. The district's Meet the Candidates night is to be determined. Next, Monroe County School Board Association committee meetings. We had the labor relations meeting. That was, so Barb, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I will. It was last Wednesday, and the presentation was on a product called Superintendent. And the Superintendent is really the superintendent evaluation. and it was very, very interesting. The top 5 reasons why you should be using Super Eval. It drives a fair, objective, and evidence-based evaluation process. It provides a singular and intuitive platform for the entire district leadership team. It creates a goal-aligned school district. It saves district leaders time and resources. BOCES aid makes it even more cost-effective. And it employs reflective best practices to transcend the evaluation to leadership development and growth. It was the actual creator of this, eval, did the presentation. His name is Michael, and I'm drawing a blank as to his last name. He was virtually coming from Buffalo because of all the weather conditions, and but many of the school districts here in Monroe County are already using this evaluation tool, and there were a lot of pluses that I liked about it, but you'd have to ask the superintendent if he liked any of the things that were presented, because he was there, as was Dr. Kenny.
I think, Barb, I think you hit home. Super Eval, has been presented a number of times. It's definitely growing across the state, and the county just had a meeting. I would say probably more than 2/3 of the superintendents are currently using Super Eval with the board. But I'll put it right back on Barb and the board that the other thing you can do with Super Eval is all of the board self-evaluation of your own work. So right now, the board utilizes paper, and we use the NSBA evaluation tools. They can incorporate the New York State School Board Association evaluation tools into Super Eval. So it just basically becomes much more intuitive and definitely online in a secure setting.
Yeah.
The other thing we can do with Super Eval, which is very interesting, is leadership evaluations. So, in terms of utilizing the rubrics for our assistant superintendents, for our principals, assistant principals, directors, they can also, it's a program that could go there. So I would tell you that as a superintendent, I'm interested in learning more. It would be definitely a conversation for potentially the board to discuss. And maybe we could always, if the board wanted to, we could bring in Super Eval there's a couple of former superintendents who are working with them, retired superintendents who we could always bring in to have a conversation of what that looks like and how it could work for us, if that's something the board wants to do. So long story short, I'm not at all worried about that side of it. I think that the technological setup is very smooth to use, is what I've heard and seen. So my 2 cents.
Board members, any comments on that? I would just say that it's been a little while since I've looked at it, probably quite a while, and I don't recall it having those other features. So
they've added to it in terms of other, not just superintendents, but also a board evaluation and administrators. They definitely have been building and growing their product.
And so that would be interesting. And of course, again, the current tools we use for evaluating the superintendent is, they've improved, but they're basically PDF forms that someone still has to compile, which falls to Sharon as the district clerk. Having a tool like this will free, one less thing she has to manage, and hopefully can improve the timelines on that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that would be tied into a workshop.
Definitely.
In a time frame that would allow us, well, I don't know how much time it would take us to make a decision to buy it, but in a time frame that allows us to evaluate it and maybe get it into the next, if we decided to get into the next school year cycle.
I agree.
Anyone else? All right. There is also the information, I lost my page here, where'd it go? Information committee meeting on January 19th. We don't have someone designated for that meeting, mainly because of the time It's at noontime. Did anyone attend? Okay. And again, didn't know if that's not a designated, there's no designated member there. So that brings us to unfinished business, which is the current board seat vacancy. So we did talk at our last meeting, which was the first meeting where we actually had a vacant seat. We talked about what the legal options were. We've had some chance to think about it, look into it. So I'd like to have some discussion on those choices, and I'll just recap the three options that we have available to us, and then we can discuss them. The first option is leaving it vacant. The second option is appointing a person who would fill that seat until the next election, and then they would have to go through the election cycle. The next election is being this May. And the third option is to have a special election, which would require 90-day notification, public notification. I also asked Sharon to give us a sense of the cost of having a special election. She provided some of an estimate based on the capital project. So the cost of having a special election would be approximately $6,800. Now that would be, again, 90 days from now, at soonest, no earlier than. But then that person would fulfill the term. They would not have to they wouldn't have to go through an election in May. So again, that puts two dates back to back. But those are the three options. And I'm going to open up the floor for the board to discuss those options. So Lisa?
I appreciate, Mark, this time to discuss this because I've been thinking a lot about it, and I'm interested to see, what our other board members think, because I feel like there's kind of pros and cons to each option. If we appoint someone, then we get someone in pretty quickly, but then we have to think about the process and develop a process because we've never done this before, which is going to take us some time, the transparency of that process, and then there's no voice of our community in that process. So that to me is sort of a con. And thinking about a special election, there's that cost and time frame, which pushes us really close to our normal election, which concerns me. The cost is concerning, but the timing is concerning. I think it might be confusing for the public. I'm curious, and I think we've reviewed this, but there is no legal obligation, is that correct, to fill it? Like we can wait until the election to fill it. Is that correct? Like there's no legal reason to do something right now.
That is correct. That is a legal option. We have to be able to seat a quorum at a board meeting. That's that's 4 attendees. 4 seats must be filled at a meeting to be able to hold it. So if we have 6 out of 7, we still fulfill the quorum requirements.
Okay. So that's kind of, I guess that's my thinking. I'm curious to hear what other people, are thinking about
it. Catherine.
Okay, so Lisa, I agree with the timing and the cost and the possible confusion. So I think that there's reasons to leave the seat vacant, which has been our practice. Since I've been on the board, there have been 2 members who resigned before their term was up, and the board, both times it kind of aligned to where the timing again was such that it was prudent just to leave the seat open. It allowed the community to have the voice in the whole process, which we are serving the community, and we're all here because the community elected us to be here on their behalf. And going forward in this, for this vacancy, that's what I think would be prudent to do, so that the public could be involved in choosing the next board member to fill that seat.
Thank you, Catherine. Barb.
I support exactly the words that Catherine just shared with us, because I too have been on the board long enough to have had resignations happen, and because the law allows that we do have a quorum, I think that going forward, that's what it should be, so that we are being transparent and we're not, trying to keep the community out of it. To me, that is the way to go.
Thank you, Barb. Kristen?
Sorry, Mike, wasn't unmuting for me. I'm going to agree with both Catherine and Barb on that. And I think the other factors that would concern me with holding an election right now is the cost, since one of our goals is just fiscal responsibility. And also, just as a new board member, I know I had to go through 2 mandatory trainings, and I know they're not offered right now. And I know I'm still learning a lot, even have had that training, that I would be, if I was a new person coming in now without that training, I think it would be even more learning that just has to occur on the spot. That's really difficult. There's a lot to learn in this role. That would be, as a new board member, just missing out on that training, I think would be very, very, very difficult.
Thank you. Emily?
I would just add to what Kristen said, just the informational meeting, finding out all the responsibilities of being a board member, that's important too. And, if someone were to be elected, they wouldn't be able to it would be quick. So it would be a fast turnover with going to that informational meeting and then, having the vote or deciding if they wanted to run even. So I think, holding it off and just waiting, along with the fiscal responsibility, and, allowing the community to vote, I think, I would be more apt to say, let's hold off and have them run and be elected in May.
Thank you, Emily. Anyone else want to add any more to that? Everyone looks like everyone's had a chance to speak, but anyone else? Okay, thank you. So it sounds like all 5 of you have a preference of leaving it vacant. And personally, I would agree, for the reasons you've all mentioned, that the best thing to do is keep it vacant. Now, we do not have to take any action to leave it vacant. That is kind of the default circumstance. We would have to take action if we chose something else. So essentially by just leaving it status quo, we will keep it vacant until we take an action to approach it a different way. Okay. So is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So then we will continue on with 1 vacancy, 6 members. I'm sure we can still maintain a quorum to conduct business, and it will be a much less confusing situation as we approach the upcoming election. And that brings us to new business, which is the discussion about I would say it quite right, but the property tax reduction for firefighters and first responders and ambulance drivers. We saw the presentation earlier today. We are required to have a public hearing if we're going to approve something like that. And thank you, Dr. Driffel. I forgot that was actually a requirement. Our next board, and we have to do it before March 1st. So that's February 28th. We have 1 meeting in February. That's February 8th. So that's fairly soon. And to have a public hearing, we have to look at when we would want to have that. There's the option of trying to have it before the meeting or having it on a different day. And of course, there's also the option of having a separate special meeting to make a vote on this. So I will I'll just say those are the kinds of options and choices we have. And again, open up the floor to if anyone has something they'd want to say about that. Yeah, Catherine.
Well, when you're saying, do we have anything to say, do you mean, is this the appropriate time to say whether or not we want to have the public hearing?
No, let me clarify. It's okay. How do we want to, if we want to pursue this, we have to have a public hearing.
Okay.
And I think if we don't have a public hearing, we will not going to be able to entertain any kind of motion at the February meeting. So let's take the premise of having a public hearing.
Okay.
And then we can listen to the public and have a motion or not have a motion at the board meeting. But the question is, do we want to try to do it? Again, we could do it on I'm just going to throw these out there, like on Monday the 7th, or have it before the meeting on the 8th. And we have to look at, timing, how much time to allocate to it. We don't want to cut people off, and then how that impacts a board meeting, or do we want to,
right,
or plan on a separate special meeting so it gives us more time for a public hearing.
Okay.
So
if we could get a public, can we get a public hearing arranged before our next board meeting?
Tom?
Well, a couple of things. So like Monday the 7th is tough because there's some commitments already in place for my team. But if the question is, can we get a public hearing in place for prior to our next board meeting, like doing it Tuesday, February 8th at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, we can do that. We've looked in, Dan and I and Sharon Arfitz have been looking, because this is new. And some of our required public hearings, we have to give the community X amount of time. Mm-hmm. And so there's really no straight language on that. But if we were to announce tomorrow, public hearing on the 8th, that provides 2 weeks, which is the typical window for hearings. We do our budget hearing prior to the board meeting. We do hearings for the safety plans that we have to have a hearing for prior to the board meeting. So that's not out of character in terms of having a public hearing prior to the board meeting. We just have the public hearing first, and then we start the meeting at our typical 6:30 time. So I would say you'd have it at 5:30 or 6, depending on what the needs are. So we could put that out. I would just need the board sort of thumbs up that we're going to move forward with a public hearing, and then we can take care of setting that up prior to the next board meeting.
Thank you, Tom.
Reasonable. Yeah, that
All
sounds
right,
reasonable to me.
All right, Kristen had her hand up.
My only question was, but I think it's kind of answered. We all need to be present for the public hearing. Is that accurate?
You would need to have a quorum of the board be present. So my understanding is you would need to have 4 members there in order to hold the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Because it would be official business, yes.
And then I would just share with the board and try and review this is that would be the public hearing. And then if anything came up in the public hearing and the board felt they did not want to vote on approving the resolution to, let's say, allow the tax exemption for volunteer firefighters and volunteer ambulance, then the board could table that vote on February 8th, and we would just need to schedule a special board meeting for the sole purpose of coming back to make that decision. So I think that's fair for the board to understand that if during the public hearing there's some points that you hadn't thought of, or you just weren't 100% sure on wanting to vote yet, we would have some time to have a special meeting for the sole purpose of coming back together to talk about that exemption and voting. And we could do that any time of the remainder of that week. It's just typically we want to inform the public of a meeting 24 hours in advance.
Okay.
But
any other comments, board members? So what time do we want? For the public hearings you mentioned earlier, the budget and I think the safety report, what time did we normally start those
We
public hearing?
typically have started those a half hour prior to our board meeting. So from like 6 to 6:30.
I get part of this is we don't know, we don't have a sense of what kind of response we're going to get out of this.
I'd recommend, on behalf of the board, I'd recommend that you start at 5:30 and then you're at least, safe. And if the hearing wraps up early, and there's not, then, there'll just be some time in between the hearing and the board meeting. Because we would still want to start the board meeting at 6:30 because that's what we publicize.
Right.
Board members, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's all right with me.
It's all right with me as well.
Okay. All right. So then we will schedule a public hearing for 5:30 on February 8th to discuss the approving a tax break for volunteer firefighters and first responders, ambulance.
Just ambulance. Yep.
Yeah.
It is clear. It's very interesting, but it is just volunteer firefighters and volunteer ambulance, which works for like Penfield. There are some communities that have other positions like safety police. Webster has safety police where they are volunteer, but they don't fall under the category of firefighter ambulance. So it's not all first responders, but those two groups specifically.
Good. So I think that is settled. Is there any additional new business? Okay. All right. With that, may I have a motion that the meeting be adjourned at 8:59 p.m.?
So moved.
Second.
Catherine, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.